you have to get them to an emotional space where they wake up every morning driven to be the best version of themselves. And in practice, for me, it was a chance to drive them, to challenge them. And this is where you have to know your teammates. Because if it's late, you just had a back-to-back and we had practice the next day and you show up, and guys don't feel like going through the motions, don't feel like practicing. It's important to know each and every one of them individually, personally, because then you know what nerve to touch. And if practice is more intense and harder than a game 7 will be, then a game 7 will be easy. But if it's not, then that's when teams start folding and capitulating. I think the best way to prove your value is to work, is to learn, is to absorb, to be a sponge. But you always want to outwork your potential. You know, as hard as you believe you can work harder than that. And that's what I tried to do when I first came in the league. But you know, basketball is such a direct competition sport. That competitive nature, the work ethic, and curiosity. Because I asked a lot of questions. I would always sit down and just ask questions about certain games that I studied growing up. What actually happened there? What did you feel there? Why? I always dreamed as a kid that, you know, it was possible to score 80 or 90 or 100. I always just like, you know, had a dream. Sometimes you lay down in bed and you visualize things. I'd imagine playing for the Lakers, and I'd imagine what the uniforms looked like. I'd imagine where we'd be playing, and the smell of the arena and all sorts of stuff. And I would see myself, you know, getting hot. So you just keep dreaming and dreaming and dreaming, and before I go to sleep, I'm like at 120 points, you know? And so when you grow up, downloading that into your brain over and over and over, and then, you know, that summer, I made 1,000 shots a day. 1,000. And they weren't just shots, it were shots that you saw in that game. They were specific shots. I mean, it was coming out of the corner, going to the pinch post, footwork in the post, coming off the screen. It was very specific. So when you download that into your system and you go out in the court and you're just executing things that you've done thousands of times before, and you have that dream, then that becomes possible. Rudy was one of my favorite films growing up. After watching that film, I come to understand if I could work that hard every day, being blessed with the physical tools that I have, what would my career be? And I made a promise to myself from that day that I was going to work that hard every single day so that when I do retire, I have no regrets. And that was the most important thing for me, is to leave no stone unturned, get better every single day. And if I lived that way, then over time, you know, I'd have something that was beautiful. And that was my philosophy. It seems like a pretty simple one, but I mean, if you live your life to just get better every single day and do that for 20 years, I mean, what do you have? You know, basketball for me was the most important thing. So everything I saw, whether it was TV shows, whether it was books I read, people I talked to, everything was done to try to learn how to become a better basketball player. Everything. And so when you have that point of view, then literally the world becomes your library to help you to become better at your craft. At 13 years old, you know, I played the longer game because my game wasn't about being better than you at 13. It was to be better than you when the chips are really on the line. So when we played at 13, I would size you up and see what your strengths and weaknesses are. How do you approach the game? Are you silly about it? Are you goofy about it? Are you good at it just because you're bigger and stronger than everybody else? Right? Or is there actually thought and skill that you put into it? Right? And when I'd play to my weaknesses. Because when you're playing summer basketball, there's so many games. So there's not a lot of skill work being done. So when are you going to get better? Right? When you're playing in competition situations, you're only playing to your strengths. Why? Because you want to win. Right? So what I would do, I was work on the things during those games that I was weak at. Left hand, post game, pull up jump shot. Right? So I have a strategy. And so then fast forward to when I'm 17 and my game is completely well-rounded, and that player at 13 that I saw at 13 is still doing the same shit at 17, now you got a problem. I see a lot of players take vacations with other players that are close friends. It's just to take vacations or just hang out, just to hang out. I never did that.
Why not though? Why didn't you do that?
Well, because when I retire, I didn't want to have to say, I wish I would have done more. I don't want that.
What were some of the factors you looked at on how to improve your game season after season?
The game itself
was it's a complicated answer. So there are very tactical things in terms of footwork and geometry of the court. So you're looking at the court and looking at the 45-degree angles that the court is shaping and how it needs to operate. That's one component to it. So looking at spots on the floor where you can increase your efficiency. Right? You can be on the wing, but there's a certain spot on the wing that improves your angle to drive to the basket, right? So that sort of stuff. Footwork of the opposition, looking at the emotion of the opposition, their tendencies, their weaknesses, and all that stuff. Understanding the momentum of the game, how to create momentum shifts, where momentum shifts come from, all this sort of stuff. And then studying outside of that, right? Looking at different industries, looking at conductors, looking at writers, looking at actors and how they get into character, and then how do they keep themselves in that mental space. So looking at different industries, looking at nature itself, and learning from that and how you can incorporate that into the game. Man, it's a lot of studying.
What is the conversation like with your wife and kids to say, listen, this is what I'm doing? How did that conversation go?
Well, with the kids, it's different. So like the communication with our children is that Pops is working hard. This is the level of attention to detail you need to have in everything you do. So it's setting the example. Same thing with my wife. My wife's a stay-at-home wife. It's the hardest job, man. So she works really hard at that. I mean, it's, and so her attention to detail with that as well are examples for our children. And then for my wife, it's, she's as competitive as I am. So she's like, listen, man, if you're gonna be out here training 8 hours a day, you're gonna spend 9 months out of the year away from your family, you better win the championship.